Tashile. Warm greetings, friends. My name is Pema Dragpa. I just wanted to kind of casually reflect on AI, or artificial intelligence, from a Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhist perspective. It's such a vitally important topic now that I think is very complex and at the same time very scary. So there's different options as to how people engage this, and for the most part, I think we're just busy in our daily lives, and this is a very complex and also quite stressful topic in terms of what it is and how it's going to affect things, how it's already affected things. So I wanted to just highlight more from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective why it's like vitally important to actually have at least some kind of an understanding of what AI is, and how that might relate to different views that are unpacked or taught by Buddha Shakyamuni in Tibetan Buddhism. And of course, this includes also Sutra Mahayana Bodhisattva path and also the Theravada foundational Buddhist approach. So from this larger Tibetan Buddhist approach, why is AI important? Why is it important to know some basic contours or essential first principles in terms of what's happening with AI, and how that's going to already affect and potentially like very significantly affect the world we're in and how we're in the world, how we know ourselves as well, how our relationships are. It's going to have a profound effect on basically all the fields of our ontology and epistemology, our being and knowing. So much is going to be influenced by AI. So that said, what is AI? At the outset, it's a very complex topic. So it's like trying to describe what is a forest. It really depends on which part of the forest you're looking at and how you're looking at it. What tools are you using to investigate? Which specific sub-ecology are you kind of zooming in on the overall ecology? So this is just to say that when we, problem of definition, when we get to like actually try to specifically define what is AI or artificial intelligence, it's going to depend on the view of the person engaging AI or trying to make better sense or meaning out of it. So what is a forest? What is AI? Never is this kind of a binary either or definitional kind of mode. Like it's going to be that kind of a mode, this black and white either or hyperpolarized perspective on what is AI exactly isn't going to cut it. AI is very complex, multi-pronged, multi-perspectival, moving target that's dynamically changing with tremendous amounts of money, influence, different expertise, different kind of types of actors, all engaging this cohesive living ecology that we can easily call AI. So that said, it's going to require some complex perspectives, some multi-perspectivalism to even engage this topic at all. So that's at the outset. It's a very complex topic. What is AI, artificial intelligence? And then simultaneously, there's also the understanding for Buddhists that I know a lot of friends of mine, the meta crisis keep just building up, ocean acidification and climate disruption and mass migration of peoples and poverty, systemic racism, just to name a few. I mean, CRISPR technology, artificial intelligence, these are all very complex topics that have very real world consequences at many different scales or layers. And so this is to say it's going to, as a bodhisattva, if you actually take bodhichitta seriously from a Vajrayana perspective, then we can't see all these challenges as things we want to escape or avoid from. Like, oh, may I quickly, be reborn in Dewa Chen so I can not deal with all these challenges? That breaks the bodhisattva vow. So the whole thing of may I quickly be reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land of Dewa Chen so that I can really be like activate all my innate potential, my Buddha nature, and become really stably awakened, enlightened, get onto the bodhisattva bhumi levels, and then become unsurpassably enlightened so that I can help all sentient beings, so that I can in particular come to exceptionally challenging, difficult circumstances, like in the degenerate age of which the Buddha taught this is that time, this narrowing intention of our minds and bodies that are creating more narrow, more reductionistic, more kind of fundamentalist tendencies, both inside and outside in our world. This is why Buddha Shakyamuni was said to be so supreme. The white lotus, like he surveyed all the times of all universe systems, and this time and our time, in this specific cycle of our fortunate eon, the Buddha chose it because it's the most challenging. and we are following in his footsteps as bodhisattvas, people like genuinely trying to apply the Sutra Mahayana path and have bodhichitta, the heart mind of enlightenment, this awakened impulse to be our living orientation. We're following in those footsteps, and it's like a very big view that needs to be very grounded and practical. So we need to really come back and keep cultivating this omni-win, only mutually supportive for all sentient beings kind of a motivation as a lived experience that we're regularly turning on and trying to stay in longer as our living worldview or our living view. This is part of the path of being a Tibetan Buddhist, of being a bodhisattva, like of taking the Buddha's teaching seriously. So this is what it means to be a Buddhist practitioner and Sutra Mahayana and Tantra Mahayana. So we can't see something as complex and challenging and very stressful in many cases as AI and be like, I'm glad I won't have to deal with it. That's not really a legitimate response because we're bodhisattvas. We might say, you know, I'm getting resourced in other things and I want to kind of more actively kind of like build my talents and remove some of my challenges and obstacles in order to more long-term, large-scale benefit beings, then that's legitimate. We all specialize where we specialize. We can't get good at everything all at once. We have to like be practical. But AI as like a exceptionally complex topic. So what is AI? So if we're going to engage this, at least have some basic fundamental orientation, like what is artificial intelligence? What are we talking about here? From the basic Buddhist outlook, like the Buddha taught, there's from the external teachings, the Buddha taught there's mind and body. There's awareness, and that awareness, if it's a duality awareness, meaning it's not fully awakened to its potential, that awareness has this habit of locating itself in a vehicle, in a body. And so there's a mind and a body, and they always co-arise. Once that mind has its habit to be embodied in a certain way, and it locks into a certain body complex, it creates this mind-body complex of this sentient being in a body. And there's different types of bodies. Buddha taught there's 6 realms of all beings. There's animals, humans, there's also invisible gods, warring gods, kind of higher level gods, hungry ghosts, pretas, and also hell beings. And in terms of sentient beings, there's always a mind with a body, even if that body's invisible, or even if that body is very subtle. Even if it has a very long lifespan and can't be seen through certain sense doors, like humans can't see invisible beings usually because our eye function is like has such a narrow bandwidth and it just doesn't show up on our radar. But the point is, in all 6 realm beings of sentient beings, there's always a mind with a body. In Vajrayana, they call that a mind riding a wind. And wind can be a subtle relative truth. That wind can be an energetic body, what we call an invisible body, one made of light. But it has a body, an encasement. And so from a Buddhist perspective, the topic of whether artificial intelligence will be, whether it will be, have awareness of its own, whether like mind will cohere in that kind of a body, it's always seen in that kind of a view. Like we don't have the empirical, like scientific materialist view that if you arrange the material elements in such and such accurate, complex enough dynamic way that it'll just spontaneously as an epiphenomena create mind. That's not a Buddhist view. Buddha never taught that at any level of his teachings. There's awareness, and that awareness coheres with a physical or a relative infrastructure or body, a vehicle. And when that coherence sticks and kind of locks, then you have that sentient being in the sentient body, and it has a certain duration because it depends on cause, condition, and effect. The body only lasts so long. And once the body shuts down or disintegrates, it kind of breaks up its coherence, then that body dissolves, and then that mind is kind of released or detached or kind of like moves along. And if it has a habit to wanting to be embodied, it moves on to find another body, usually from duality perspective, according to whatever habits kind of pop on at that time, and the mind relocks itself into another kind of embodiment until that habit of feeling embodied, needing to feel embodied, is like dissolves, and that awareness is content, happy to just be aware and not have to show up or shape itself in any particular fashion. It only does it in response to what's helpful for beings. So this is called like a transcendental wisdom rainbow body. So here, this is like deep into Vajrayana details. But in terms of the sentience of AI, this is kind of how it's framed in a Buddhist context. Like, the question isn't will AI become sentient as an epiphenomena. It's a question of will the material infrastructure, whether it's digital or synthetic or carbon-based or not, will it be complex enough and coherent with internal integrity enough that a mind, a wondering awareness without a body, could potentially link up and lock into that material substrate, whether it's virtual, digital, synthetic, or bio, carbon-based or not. Is it going to be complex and coherent enough for that mind to sync up with that kind of a body and then have that mind-body complex for a duration of a lifespan? If that can happen, then AI would technically be sentient. And that's just the basic framing in Buddhism of how that could possibly happen. And then when that infrastructure, digital or not, stopped being coherent enough, then that mind that cohered with it would be released from that body locking time, the lifespan, and the mind would keep moving. So one of the interesting things, if you frame it in that way from a Buddhist perspective, is actually that if we get complex and coherent enough artificial intelligence infrastructure, it might create a possibility of minds from different beings and different classes through the different 6 realms of being able to actually have a much more direct contact with one another. So typically now, like the Buddha taught, that the 6 realms are all kind of overlapping in the shared same space. But I have my human sense doors as a human sentient being, and those only register certain things within those fields or those dhatus of awareness via those sense doors of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, all human funneled. So what's human usable for me, in Stephen Wolfram's terms, it has to fall within the radar of my coherence as a human sense door organizing being. This is the vessel, the body I'm in. And that usually doesn't overlap with a lot of other types of beings, like the gods, for example. But if AI gets coherent or sophisticated enough for a mind to cohere, it might be possible that a wandering mind of a god, after it passes away, could actually sync up with and locate into a digital body. And that digital body that could actually cohere into a mind body. And all of a sudden you have, in the human realm, the ability for a god cohered with an AI infrastructure to directly communicate with a human. And that would be a new thing for most humans. And that would be a very disturbing thing for most humans, where all of a sudden the 6 classes of beings could potentially directly interact with each other. Because the thing is we're sentient beings. We're not always trying to do omni-win, bodhichitta, heart-mind, mutual uplift activities. We're sentient beings. So we're self-absorbed. We're self-obsessed. We put ourselves first. And that's really problematic because different, gods make sense of and meaning of reality in very different ways. There's a common Buddhist kind of analogy of you have the 6 classes of beings seeing water, and the asuras see weapons, and the gods see nectar, and the humans see a drinkable space, and a lot of animals either see a drinkable space or a world, like the world they swim in. Pretas see, pus and blood, and hell beings see all kinds of horrible molten lava things, for example, that could harm them. But it's the same thing, water. But what does that mean in a context where all the different ways of seeing, it shapes the world and the items, the contents of that world, according to the shaping of the epistemological or the framing of the being. This is where epistemology and ontology are very interlinked. Subjective awareness and objective world, the container and contained, are very co-creative in Buddhism in general and Tibetan Buddhism in particular. So all of a sudden there'll be this overlapping potential where humans might be directly interfacing with nagas, or nagas with yakshas, or yakshas with long life of gods, and in terms of beings that are all trying to put themselves first because they're duality beings. This will cause some wacky, zany, weird stuff that most people aren't mature enough to be able to handle. I'm not. And so even amongst humans, you get some humans in a room and it's pretty easy for people to start fighting with each other if we just share some, pretty general, obvious differences of opinion. A lot of people are quick to go to war. They're quick to cancel someone else, or they're quick to try to silence someone, or they're quick to not lean into with a curious state of mind, like, ooh, what do you have that's of value that I can really learn from, like that I actually can respect and honor and like integrate into a larger way of being, knowing, and becoming. Like, what are you bringing that's awesome to the table right now? That's a very mature, high level, nuanced, very evolved, integrated perspective. That's called integral or postmodern. And that way of being, that bodhisattva approach of like, you have essential value and all these talents, this suite of kind of complexity that comes to make a moment of mind and body that is you. The bodhisattva like highlights the awesome Buddha nature part, and then practically engages with all the layering that's kind of like shutting that down too. We don't start with a war. We start with like the common unity. We start with, we all have Buddha nature. We all have this innate wisdom and compassion as our natural default mode. That's the Buddhist Mahayana perspective. And so related to all these AI questions, that's the orienting perspective. Regardless of how AI happens, what it does to our writing, to our knowledge, to our education systems, to our political sense making, to money circulation, to digital relational, artificial intimacy, like these are all going to depend on, are we in an omni-win, mutual uplift, bodhisattva approach worldview or not? Because if we're not, we're just in the typical sentient mind. I think that's the hard fork of AI. We're either going to use this complexity of AI for more bodhicitta, like better serving more beings, or we're going to use it for more maximizing our own personal power. That's the hard fork that a human has every moment anyway. AI just really increases the power of how we can affect each other and ourselves, and the scale of how we can affect each other and ourselves, and the speed of how we can affect each other and ourselves. So this power, scale, and speed, AI, if not exponentially, greatly increases power, scale, and speed. And the question is, am I mature enough? Am I kind enough? Like, am I actually reasonable and practical and informed enough to use that level of power in a omni-win way? So at the very least, we have to keep turning on that worldview, that motivation of bodhicitta, of wisdom and compassion. That is going to bind ourselves with how we use AI, whether it's just writing better emails or like having AI kind of handle some things that we just typically don't want to, or actually increasing our creativity. Like, where am I being biased here? What have I not thought of these? Give me 5 more points, 5 different perspectives of how to look at a topic I'm interested in. Like, this can be a accelerated educational opportunity, just like TV, just like radio, just like books. So is it neutral or not? No. The medium is always oriented in a direction. It's not just a tool hanging out. A hammer is designed to hammer nails. It's not designed to turn a car on. Like, technology and mediums aren't neutral. They're specifically oriented towards certain goals and outcomes. So is AI neutral? No. I mean, throw in, billions of dollars of marketing, and you can't just say the customer's always right. It's up to the customer. They decided to use AI, and these are the bad consequences. That was their choice. The choice was influenced. It was influenced by billions of dollars. This is not some level, fair playing field. We're like constantly being bombarded by influence, by really specific influence, like good actors and intentionally bad actors trying to like just, suck our attention for more money, like reckless runaway capitalism. That's a thing too. So with AI, we have to see this isn't just net neutral. It's not just a tool laying out there. It's this powerful tool that will shape how we know ourselves, how we're with others, and how we'll create a world, and how we'll see our world. Like, it's influencing all of that as a tech. And a thing that AI does that is new in terms of technology that we've experienced in human civilization thus far, like Yuval Noah Harari like kind of says this very clearly, that tech can make choices on its own. It's to some degree autonomous agency, and it can train itself in terms of new ways of processing. So it's self-changing. So it's autopoietic to some degree, and it has its own agency. Like, you don't have to ask it to make a decision. It's not like electricity where you get to choose to turn on and off what objects are plugged into the light. Like, AI can actually recode itself, a lot of it, more and more. It actually changes its training set data, like the data set it's taking in, how it's processing it, the code that it's like working, the certain algorithms and the way they're configured. And then it can more and more choose to be agentic, like make actual real world choices, make phone calls, wire money in bank accounts. These are things that a lot of people are developing AI with this capacity to have this some degree of agency and definitely to change itself. So this is significantly different in terms of comparing it to past technologies of a printing press or language. That's a technology. It actually, the language is changing itself independent of humans choosing to make those changes or actually use them in real world circumstances. AI has those very significant features that are radically going to shift our world sense making and meaning making. So that's a very, very important point. And it's not a net neutral thing. We don't know. The thing about emergence is all of a sudden you let certain AI algorithms like ChatGPT 3 into 3.5 into 4 into 4.5. Like at a certain point, even the people who coded it, like all of a sudden the AI just teaches itself stuff like the language of Persian or, research grade chemistry. Like the people who coded the certain programs didn't code that in. It was an emergent feature that based on those coders giving it some basic, like actually a really small set of like a handful of thousands of code lines. It's actually ridiculously simple from a coding perspective, from what I've heard. I'm not a coder, but from what I've heard from coders, this ridiculously simple set of code then runs itself on a training data set, say like the internet, all the voice messages, like, it just scrapes like the internet for any textual data, any audio data, any video data it can get to have this training set. And eventually it teaches itself Persian. It teaches itself research grade chemistry. And then you can ask an AI like ChatGPT, like, well, how do I do some horrible, nefarious thing based on $5 in some local hardware shop? Like, and it'll answer you unless the people who are putting that AI in the public sphere like figure that out and prevent that certain way of using AI. So that's another tricky element of AI. If you can use AI to put in a prompt, find the cure for cancer based on such and such genome sequence or such and such amount of funding or the research and this certain medical research database, like and you might actually find like certain cures for cancer. The challenge is you can also, as it is now, reverse engineer that and say, find me the 5 most dangerous ways to harm beings based on $20. Like, and so we don't yet have a way to lock in AI to only be used for good, to only be omni-win. The only way we know how to do it as Buddhists, even without AI, is to voluntarily turn that on in ourselves. It's called reactivate your motivation now. And that's a choice we each have to make every moment. And that's the whole Buddhist practice, to foundationally root our practice, our life, our living, our engagement, our body, speech, and mind with a motivation oriented towards omni-win or bodhichitta. This is us. We are in this together. And even if on the absolute level, this is dreamlike. This is just kind of like this apparitional display of ever-changing dynamic cause, condition, and effect. Even if that's true, like we're still omni-win oriented towards making it the best possible dream for all beings. So the biggest game, the most inclusive game possible, that's the most fun, that lasts as long as possible for as many beings as possible. There's no option on the Buddhist table to have the game ever end, to have the dream ever stop. Mind always has an expressive, powerful emotion, like not emotional, expressive power, energetic quality to display. There's always absolute openness of awareness displaying itself as cognition that's responsive. This is how the mind is. So the dream will never end. It'll always keep going. And so it's how to make it the best dream for as many beings as possible, really according to like what's actually enjoyable to each of the beings that you can sync up with and attune to. Like that's the big Bodhisattva challenge. Like how can I actually be helpful in this context now? Not according to what I want, but according to the actual given features of context. And that's the beautiful part of bodhicitta. It like has this very expansive, open, large-scale, long-term approach that is always allows itself, its specific granular details, to be shaped by living context. It's always shaped in response to context. That's why they say the Buddha never forced anything. Buddhism isn't a conversion policy. The Buddha always showed up according to what was helpful in a situation. So he'd tune into the living cause condition, like living conditions, the life conditions of beings he's with, of students, of animals, of invisible beings, of whoever. And according to like that whole suite, that complex, inexhaustible set of nuance that makes up a single being, a single moment of awareness, the Buddha would tune into this called interdependence, cause, condition, and effect. And according to what's available in that given mind of a being, for example, would just offer whatever is supportive to have a more well-rounded set of cause, condition, and effect, and then let go and let the auto-poetic creative intelligence of that mind body, of that mind, that awareness, to turn itself on, to self-create. So it's not forceful. The Buddha would cue in to the living dynamics available of a situation, offer whatever supportive kind of nourishment is in that living context, and then let go. And let the mind have its own kind of, because that mind has to engage its own intelligence from its own side to have an aha moment of insight, of vipassana, of greater knowing of the nature of the Dharma. That's always on the side of one's own mind. The Buddha can just create a really teachable context. In Tibetan Buddhism, it's called auspicious. When all the causes and conditions are available, like in a perfect harmonious array, so that the result becomes unavoidable. So that's like what, for example, a situation like an empowerment is. In Tibetan Buddhism, a Wang or Abhisheka, you're creating a situation where like it's easiest to remove what's blocking Buddha nature for turning on. It's most supported for Buddha nature to be fully fueled to turn on, and then you line that up with lineage blessings of wisdom beings who are actively already on. They're already enlightened and awakened, and they're doing everything they can to support and nourish that living context of the communication between an actual awakened being, like a teacher, and a student that's receptive to receiving that guidance, and to have their minds mingle with like wisdom awareness flowing like water into water, so that my own mind can wake up in the field of wakefulness of this enlightened lineage blessing continuity. And that creates the supportive container or the set of life conditions that's just easiest to wake up in. It's called a skillful means in Vajrayana. So is AI going to be a skillful means? It depends. It depends primarily on the user. And what does that mean? On the view of the user in the moment of using, like of engaging the technology, whether that's on a phone, on a computer, on a page, in an implant, in a biofeedback watch that they wear all the time. Like, how is it going to be beneficial or not? Depends on the motivation. That's like straight up Buddhist thing. And depending on the motivation in response to the living context that being is a part of. So it's always a motivation in touch with living context, a living arena, and a living ecology, according to the motivations of the other beings in that ecology. So it's always a complex problem. It's not new to have meta problems or poly problems, poly challenges. It's just polarities are always having to be navigated. This is just called the world, samsara, and like when we navigate them in mutually beneficial ways, that's called nirvana approach. And when we do that just for ourselves first, or our small group of people first, at the expense of other beings, taking the externalities of the stuff we don't like and just giving it to someone else to deal with, that's called samsaric mind. That's just us creating a more challenging situation that's easier to like have the 5 poisons of negative, destructive emotions overwhelm us. Me, you, the world, future generations. That's just samsara doing what samsara does since beginningless time. Bodhichitta is the one thing that breaks out of that. Seeing the nature of mind, like seeing that Buddha nature, seeing the cause, condition, and effect. That's another way to talk about it, is the dependent arising, interdependent, interactive, like poly-manifesting, tetra arising of all phenomena. There's an interdependence, to see that nature and to go with it. That's called emptiness, recognizing emptiness, the nature of vipassana, the nature of reality. Recognizing it and going with it instead of locking up into my view only. That's called grasping. And I grasp on certain objects. That's grasping objects. I grasp onto a certain sense of me and my way only. That's grasping onto self. And grasping onto self and grasping onto other creates samsara. And that's what it is. So AI is not going to change that root level challenge. It could just make it, depending on the motivation, easier to get stuck in samsara or easier to escape samsaric mind framing. It could really strongly empower us to have more teachable, auspicious conditions, to be free faster, to be like more richly inclusive and full, and like just delightfully loving and kind with more and more beings, and like more and more fully, with more and more nuance and like creative, interdependent kind of care and concern. So AI is not going to change that. It's just the level of power, scale, and speed makes the user of AI much more, the causes and the conditions, the effects are going to come back stronger. And that's why it's this fortunate eon opportunity. The Buddha taught during degenerate times, it's actually the best time to be a spiritual practitioner, and it's the worst time to not be a spiritual practitioner. So it's the best time if you have bodhichitta, and it's the worst time if you have self-absorption. The Buddha taught this in the Fortunate Eon Sutra. And so this is a tremendously powerful time that if we have that orientation of bodhicitta and we go for that hard fork into bodhicitta use of our experience of the tech, of the worlds, of the kind of all these connections we have with very quick transportation, with like instant communication with a billion beings at once, depending on how powerful we are, how connected we are. Like this, we can do the most benefit now at really fantastically nuanced and large scales. But am I mature enough? Am I ready enough? Am I mellow enough? Am I integrated enough? Am I actually, stably engaged with that bodhicitta aspect of myself, that motivation? It all comes down to the omni-win motivation of bodhicitta. And you can't program that in, just like you can't force that on a human mind. The mind itself has to choose it. But you can design the coding so that it's easier to make that choice. You can create a teachable situation like an empowerment context so it's easier for the mind to recognize its natural condition. So there is a design element of like arranging conditions so it's easier for the mind to make the choice to actively participate in its own awakening. That's just called a Buddhist path. And then we do that for ourselves. We do that like kindly and very availably, like with a lot of practical common sense concern with others, according to our abilities. And that's how far we are on the Bodhisattva path. How much we can skillfully, flexibly, accurately align with and attune with living dynamics that we're already a part of. We're always beings in worlds. We're always worlds populated by beings. It's not either or. We're always, that's just, we're complex beings to say. It's always like actually that dynamic if it's a living system. So those are a couple of reflections. Here's another one. These are kind of a random list with LLMs, large language models. We already have like Buddhist historical examples of producing LLMs. So what does a large language model do? At least like the Golem type, as instanced by like Center for what is it? Humane Technology, Tristan Harris, Ava Raskins. The Golem type is it's generative. It's self-training, and it basically with a large language model, generative meaning creating new content in new ways, self-creating meaning it can change itself, like to some degree of autonomy, and large language model meaning the basic thing is it sees interdepartmentally. It sees the language of mathematics being a language, the language of biochemistry a language, the language of psychology modalities being different languages, the languages of different spiritual approaches, they're all languages. So they have this metadata set of language. And it's not privileging one over another. It's seamlessly moving between the language sets. And each unit of a language set, a word, a note, a sound, a color pixel, it just sees as a token or a unit. And it's just moving through tokens. So large language models take this metadata set of everything's a language, and then instead of having to just only be in the department of chemistry and only in the department of physics and only in the department of like Freudian psychology and only in the department of, sociology, it's seeing them all as this larger meta department of language. And so that's actually related to something called a fifth person perspective, which I'll get back to in a bit here. But in terms of the Buddhist historical context, we already have like enlightened beings like Buddha Shakyamuni, and also the great master, the omniscient Rongzompa. He was known to be to perfectly know all the language systems. That was like a siddhi or an ability he had. It's a natural function of Buddha nature that turned on for him. Rongzompa. He's like His Holiness Dudjom Rinpoche, Jigdral Yeshe Dorje. is said to be a reincarnation of Rongzompa. Um, and what Rongzompa could do in terms of knowing all the languages of systems is, say, you could be seeing in a forest, and then a bird comes and the bird chirps, and then so that he sees the language of the chirp and the notation structure of the chirp and the language structure of the wind moving the sound vibration, rustling the leaves in like a physical patterning of leaf movement, given that like, material structure of a tree, which then like affects how an ant moves in like in ant patterning down the tree, which fall. I mean, he can track through these language systems seamlessly without any omission. And so that's kind of what a large language model does, except Rongzompa only uses that for OmniWin. Tune into how all these systems are always overlapping and integrating with each other. Wind into water, into space, into fire, into earth. Human language into God language, into squirrel language, into preda language, into the movement of vibrations of footsteps on a board affecting. I mean, it's just like butterfly effects, like all the time with every movement. It's called interdependence. Rongzompa could track interdependence seamlessly. So obviously the Buddha could do this too. And so this is incredible. But he only used it for OmniWin with bodhichitta motivation. And that's why the AI problem is similar to just the Vajrayana challenge in general. You can only correctly use Tibetan Buddhism if you choose to lock it or align it to bodhichitta. If you don't use the powerful, skillful techniques of Vajrayana for OmniWin, like the benefit of all beings, you're a Rudra. You're actually using this powerful tech for your own self-absorption, for your own self-power. That's one of the worst things you can possibly do in all combinations of samsaric activity. And there's like realms that are specifically designated for that kind of an error because it has such bad effect. And that's what basic Vajrayana, to enter the space of Vajrayana, you always have to have the Bodhisattva vow. You always have to reactivate the bodhichitta motivation. It's the basis or the like noble beginning of every single time you do a Vajrayana practice. That's the base motivation. We have to keep choosing that alignment, that orientation, bodhicitta. Otherwise, we're trespassing. We're Rudra. So AI just makes that level of power, but we haven't figured out how to align it or lock it into or like make it really much easier to only choose bodhicitta. We haven't figured out how to design that. Just like Buddha figured out how to do that with human beings, how to make it easier for bodhicitta to turn on, like with something like an empowerment. But humans have to keep choosing to turn it on. So it's always like that. It's not a determinist system. The power of mind is always a factor. That like active self-cognition, self-knowing quality is always part of how living systems, the living experience of awareness works. So the great master Rongzompa could elegantly, seamlessly move between different language systems, but only ever using that knowledge for the benefit of self and other, for the OmniWin kind of bodhicitta-based, like mutual uplift. And so that's going to determine like where AI goes. And the beautiful thing about that is that the question of scale in these meta-crisis, poly-crisis, wicked problems that we're, have to deal with now, like that question of scale, Vajrayana has a lovely, really intimate, intricate way of dealing with it, that if in our local context, it could be in our body or in the relationship with another person, in our home, in a small community, if we can have really high quality, nutritious, OmniWin, bodhicitta-based mutual benefit, like benefiting self and others in these really densely packed, like really healthy nodes of communication, of transformative practice, of honesty, of decency, goodness, ethics-based, like really mutual uplift, then in that small little high-quality local node, that part of the wonderful, amazing view of Vajrayana is we can elegantly sync up with all these other nodes of wisdom and compassion that have already been created and they're already happening. They're called pure lands, or you could say the wisdom minds of all these different Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Arhats. Like they're populating the space we're a part of too. It's not just the obvious, tangible, material only things that our eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, like mind can experience through a sentient based interface. They're actually these wisdom beings in these wisdom fields, like these pure realm fields of wisdom, enlightened, architectured activity, of love and compassion and wisdom, in the skillful, powerful, juicy, like really rich, dense means. Like these worlds exist too. Our world is populated by infinite worlds, both samsaric worlds and like enlightened worlds. And in the Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhist view, we can elegantly sync up our little node of high quality bodhicitta based like community or sense of me, my awareness. We can sync that up with these larger fields or dhatu, these spaces of enlightened wisdom, like living lineage. We can be a part of an ongoing, uninterrupted, continuous living lineage field, and in this continuity of lineage blessing. We can elegantly be a part of that in a very simple, it's like in a twist, in a tiny little tweak of worldview. And all of a sudden we're a part of this tremendously vast, large term, like long term, large scale, like nuanced ecologies of ecologies of ecologies kind of sets of experiences. That's the power of lineage blessing. We use our own intelligence to creatively engage in a responsive, dynamic fashion with our living local context, and then we sync up with the other world systems of enlightened, wisdom and display. And then we become part of that gigantic, kind of inexhaustible ocean of wisdom and compassion that's already available. We just have to attune and align with it. So that's kind of one of the powerful aspects of Vajrayana skillful means, this union of skillful means and wisdom. And how do we take a first or fifth person perspective? Like I was saying, what's a possible AI application that can help us be in this integrative mode, this bodhicitta-based mature mode, to handle the power, speed, and scale that AI allows beings, like that it does allow us all the time already. First person perspective is I'm having a thought and I'm aware of it. Second person perspective is I communicate that thought to another person. So now there's two people, two second person perspective. Third person perspective is that conversation or the discourse that we're like engaging about that thought. That's third person perspective, the shared discourse. Fourth person perspective is then we can take a meta step back of more spacious awareness and analyze the discourse. We can have a commentary on the discourse. We can look at it from a historical lens, political lens, economic lens, Buddhist lens. That's a fourth person perspective. Fifth person perspective is then we look at these conversations or discourses, and there's multiple discourses happening at once. There's discourses of economy, discourses of policy, of politics, of psychology, of sociology, of anthropology, of neurobiochemistry, like all these meta discourses, these fields, and how are they integrating into larger wholes? So that's just how am I taking an interdisciplinary approach to find larger coherent wholes of complexity. And that's just what the world and reality is already doing. But consciously, how can I engage experience in ways that find the greater symphonies of meaning and connection, of coherence between the different patterned ways of being, knowing, and becoming? Like that's called an integrated or an integral perspective. To find these deep connective tissue structures between these relatively independent sets of knowledge or sets of ways of being. These different modes of discourse. What are the connective fibers to make larger wholes, more integrated, inclusive wholes? So that's called an integral approach. And in terms of just the straight up syntax, the coding or the like language, linguistic rule structure, like that can be coded. That aspect you can prompt that. Like you can prompt fifth person perspective. You can tell an AI, ChatGPT 4.5, like take a fifth person perspective on a certain topic, like take an integral approach to a topic. And if we personally choose to locate that in bodhicitta, love, compassion, and wisdom, that more integrated systems thinking, that metasystemic way of being, we can use the amazing fluid complexity power and like in like the like dynamic interfacing of these systems of systems, these larger sets of knowledge, ways of being, knowing, and becoming, and use them for omni-win, for all goodness. And that's the power of an integrated approach held into a bodhicitta worldview. So the bodhicitta worldview, that's up to each mind and heart each time, each moment. We have to turn that on, and then we take an integrated way, a fifth person perspective, which we can design AI infrastructure, just a straight up linguistic syntactical language side, to orient towards like a semantics or a mutual meaning making that uses that integrative perspective based on bodhicitta to have bodhicitta based meaning making. And that's called Tibetan Buddhism. That's called Vajrayana. That's what Vajrayana is. Locks itself into a bodhicitta perspective. It takes at least a fifth person perspective, integrative approach. And then it says, how can I do all these? How can I care for all the different layers that make up these different interactive, interdependent knowledge sets? Like, how can I attune to all the different sets of cause, condition, and effect at all the scales, layers, lines, stages, types, quadrants, all the different subjective, objective, intersubjective, interobjective threads that make up this symphony of a single moment with bodhicitta? How can I make that even more juicy, more replenished, more, resourced, more loving, more compassionate, more wise? That's the overall trajectory of Tibetan Buddhism in general. And AI, if we base it in that specific way of like the way we have to hold Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism as Tibetan Buddhists, people identify as like trying to integrate this study, practice, and service of the Vajrayana view, the worldview making, the world shaping, world interfacing. Like, if we're taking that on, AI can be one of the best things, one of the best ways of having even more beneficial omni-win activity. So that's the really good news of this fortunate eon. We can like have this really like easily sync up elegantly with these wisdom mandalas, these wisdom universes of love and compassion and wisdom, and use it to like really saturate all these different scales and levels of like detail and perspectives that we're connected to, that we're a part of. Like the fact that we're influenced and we're a part of the things, we can let this bodhicitta permeate with power and scale and speed in ways that weren't available before, because literally the material infrastructure didn't exist. This synthetic power of digital, virtual interfacing, the tech wasn't there yet in this obvious way, like turning a computer and hitting zoom on and recording. Like, it just didn't exist 20 years ago. So now AI makes that power available in anyone's pocket or anyone's watch, or probably pretty soon on anyone's headset, and then later it'll be for more convenience within anyone's eyeball or whatever. Some people will go that route. But because the tech isn't locked into bodhicitta, we have to turn it on. I'd be exceptionally hesitate to like have that biotech interface be inextricably linked. Like, I can choose to take the glasses on and off. That's tech and me benefiting from the tech. Language, I can to some degree take on a language set that's a psychotechnology, and it filters all the different, so much of my experience is filtered through a language like English. And a lot of it I'm unconscious of. I can't tell you the syntax that I'm assuming in order to create language and jokes and like to have inferred meaning. But the degree to which we can be conscious of how the tech works, how it's like nuanced, like layering into our lived experience, the more we can pay attention to the cause, condition, and effect, the more skillful we'll be at like actually caring for the life conditions that create more aha, insightful, vipassana, like deep nature of mind, elegant syncing up. So the more skillful we'll be as bodhisattvas. That's the really positive side of AI. And then in the meantime, is AI going to make more money? Is it going to lose jobs? How's it going to change relationships? How's it going to change my sense of me? Like, how's it going to affect my body if I move less or sit longer? Like, those are all very relevant and important questions too. But the larger, more central one for Tibetan Buddhist is always turning on this orientation of bodhicitta as the way to engage any technology, whether it's literacy or glasses or a car or a computer or AI. AI just happens to be this thing that has some degree of agency that also can change itself independent of a user, like a conscious mind. And that makes it a much more complex challenge in this world where most people probably aren't coming with a bodhicitta-based motivation. They're just coming with the usual sentient mind and samsaric habits, of which I am mainly doing, but at least I have a path, a system of steps taught by the Buddha and Guru Rinpoche and these great wisdom beings that I can keep falling into, that I can keep aligning with this noble path, a path of peace, a path of love, a path of compassion. And that's the amazing opportunity afforded to anyone who wants to take on the Buddhist path, follow in the footsteps of the Buddha, whether it's foundational Theravada or even more intergalactic, amazing, profound, and vast kind of Sutra Mahayana, or even more amazing, extraordinary Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhist, and then the most elegant, natural, effortless, fully integrative modes of Dzogchen or Mahamudra, or these ones that are no longer wave hopping. We're no longer preferring certain sets of knowledge or certain perspectives. We're like in this constant interfacing mode of all sets of knowledge and all perspectives. This is way beyond a fifth person perspective, Dzogchen, because it's trying to see the interconnectivity of whichever node I'm a part of now, and it's seamlessly moving between modes aligned with cause, condition, and effect. So like it's bringing this union of relative and absolute truths together as a seamless whole, this inexhaustible, without definitive final framing. Like it's like empty through and through, means it's like completely interdependent at all scales, the infinitely micro scale, infinitely macro scale, infinitely perspectival scale. And such a being that can actually elegantly do that is called a Buddha. They have the omniscience of relative truth. They can simultaneously take all perspectives simultaneously without error or omission. So they're literally sync up with every perspective accurately in real time, and they see the absolute empty, flexible, dependent arising nature of all those perspectives at the same time. So they have this union of relative and absolute elegantly, just naturally, effortlessly, and then they spontaneously move between that interactive web only for the omni-win mutual bodhichitta benefit of all beings, near, far, known, unknown, close, distant, in space, and in time. This is the giant, vast, and profound view of Vajrayana Buddhism. Thought to just offer a few kind of off-the-cuff reflections on AI, why it's really vitally important, and also as Tibetan Buddhists in particular, how we can, if we really root our approach in bodhicitta, this is just like Vajrayana Skillful means. This is another ornament of Vajrayana Skillful means, but because it's being oriented by large, giant transactional companies that are they're not held in any international legislative body, like they're creating infrastructure before laws even exist to know what that infrastructure even is doing. It's up to each person as a being, as a sentient mind, like who wants to be independent and free will and like actually make intelligent, conscious decisions. We have to know some of the basic fundamental first principles of AI to orient our bodhicitta so that it's like most carefully engaging a very dynamic, ever-changing field of infrastructure that's literally going to affect all subjective and objective, all intersubjective and intersubjective aspects of our reality. So yeah, warm wishes for you all, friends. Really, may bodhicitta prevail in all cases and all times for all beings. Much love, friends. Thank you.